The Charlotte Ledger Podcast is a member of the Queen City Podcast Network.
This podcast episode is brought to you by Coca-Cola Consolidated, Charlotte's local bottler and the largest Coca-Cola bottler in the U.S. Coca-Cola Consolidated demonstrates a strong commitment to supporting veterans and military families through initiatives like the Veterans Resource Group, Hiring Our Heroes partnerships, and community engagement events, recognizing the value of their service and skills. Learn more at www.coconsolidated.com/behindthebottle.
Welcome to the Charlotte Ledger Podcast. I'm Steve Dunn. To find out more about the Charlotte Ledger, visit thecharlotteledger.com. I'm joined today by Todd Smith, Executive Director of the Bechtler Museum of Modern Art, devoted to global modernism and its legacies. Welcome, Todd.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
I think most of our listeners are at least a little bit familiar with the Bechtler Museum, but for those who are only a little bit familiar, I'd love to hear from you sort of what it is, what its mission is, and what you do there.
Yeah, so I think most people know us from the Firebird that sits in front of our building.
The tall, mirrored sculpture that adorns the corner out there on the street, the very Instagrammable example of, is it modern or contemporary art?
That would be considered contemporary, and we can get into that in a minute about the definitions there. But no, it is the most Instagrammed image in Charlotte. Many people know us because of the programming we've done over the last 15 years since we opened in 2010. That brings people into the museum for music programs. And then the collection, which is a world-class collection of European and American modern art, and that is primarily art from around 1900 to 1970, which is the standard definition of what modern art is. The collection was put together by the Bechtler family in Zurich, Switzerland. Their son, Andreas, came to Charlotte in the late 70s, and when the parents passed away, he and his sister inherited the full collection of art, and he brought his half of the collection to Charlotte and was going to open his own museum. And then the city came forward in 2006 to 2008 and put together this great idea that the Bechtler should have a building on South Tryon Street next to the Mint and a block away from the Gantt. And they were off to the races from 2008 to 2010 when all three of us opened our new buildings in Uptown Charlotte.
How much of the collection is on display at any given moment?
Great question. It varies. We have about 2,000 objects in the collection, and our mission is to really show as much of the collection as possible. And unlike other museums that may have galleries and wings dedicated to just the collection, we rotate our collection through with traveling exhibitions. And so you might come to see us, and the collection will be the entire museum. Other times you'll come and there's another exhibition from somewhere else around the world that's on view at the museum. So roughly, we think we've shown well over half the collection to the public in the last 15 years, and we continue to look deep into the collection for works that might not have been on view yet to show. And we put them out in really creative ways to help people understand what the history of the last 125 years of art has been.
Who are the Bechtlers, and how did they put the collection together? Art lovers from Switzerland?
Lovers, yeah. So, Swiss, so they're very quiet. But Hans and Bessie, who are Andreas's parents, and their extended family were major supporters of artists and the art world in Central Europe throughout the 20th century. And so throughout several decades, they just started to get to know these artists. They invited them into their home in Zurich and put together this collection that really became the centerpiece of the family's interest in supporting the arts.
So they knew some of the artists personally through
fact,
their social circles.
And, commissioned them to do works in Europe, commissioned them to do works here. And then when the collection was inherited by the children, it became an important part of the Charlotte ecosystem for the arts.
Well, and so Andreas comes to Charlotte, and through luck and happenstance and good planning and a fortuitous twist of fate, we end up with the Bechtler Museum of Modern Art right here in Charlotte.
And one of the nice things is because the Bechtler fills a gap within the art world in Charlotte. The Mint Museum, where I was curator in the 90s, has a very strong American collection, decorative arts, and contemporary craft. What it did not have was a strong European collection. And so here was this other collection that existed in Charlotte in a private collection that makes a really nice complement. So, for instance, a couple of years ago when the Mint did their large Picasso exhibition, we also did an exhibition that was art in the age of Picasso. And it really gave the historical and geographical context to what was happening in Europe when Picasso was creating the works that were on view at the Mint next door. So the fact that we were able to use our own collection to give context was really an important partnership.
That's interesting. And you're geographically proximate, right? You're just right across the street.
Spitting distance.
Yeah. Are you friendly in every respect, or are you competitors in some sense?
No, I think if you can be both, we are both. We are extremely friendly. We along with the Gantt and all of our other partners around there, we really do work together to bring exciting things to Uptown Charlotte. All of us are free on Wednesday nights, so that really has made a huge difference for us, especially in bringing in new audiences.
Well, to be clear, what you mean there is that the Mint Museum, the Bechtler Museum, and the Gantt Museum, all every Wednesday evening, anybody can just go there and go to all three of them for no charge.
Yeah. And we also rotate programming among the three of us on those Wednesday nights. So there could be a lecture or a performance with us on a Wednesday night, and the next week it'll be at the Mint or it'll be at the Gantt. So we try to make sure that we are programming in a way that we're not competing with each other as well. But we do compete. We compete for ideas. We compete for support. We compete for visitors. But most visitors that will go to one museum will go to all three. You know, if you're a museum visitor, you love the experience of going to a museum, whether it's one that you know very well or one that you're just starting to get to know.
I think I know what all three of those museums do, but I'd love to hear from you. If I'm a visitor from Charlotte and I want to have a day of taking in art, what am I going to see at each of those three spots?
You're putting me on the spot here. So I'll speak for the Bechtler first.
And I don't mean about traveling exhibitions. I just mean sort of in general, right? Like into the mission of the organization.
So what you'll see at the Bechtler is art of the last 125 years, starting in 1900 through today. We're a gem of a building, a very intimate experience. It's 45 minutes to an hour to see the entire museum, to experience all that we're showing. We do exhibitions throughout the course of the year that showcases the collection, but also other ideas that we don't have expressed within the collection. Art of the last 125 years is what the Bechtler does. The Mint, much more expansive, 2 locations, a longer history in Charlotte, a collection built by many generations of art collectors in Charlotte and community supporters. There you'll see a variety of exhibitions ranging from more historical American art up through contemporary art. A strong focus now, I think, on their part on art that is relevant to social issues of the day, along with a great tradition of supporting crafts and costume and ceramics. The Delham collection is excellent for sure. Gantt tells a much different story. It tells the story of the African-American experience throughout, not just in Charlotte, but throughout the world. And I think they've done an amazing job in the last few years of reaching further out into the global conversation as well as to what African and African-American art and the African experience might be.
You describe a friendly collaboration, a community that exists where you're all physically proximate to each other. You're all engaged in the similar pursuit, which is to try to bring art to people through the mechanism of a museum. And the way that you work together, it kind of reminds me of it's suggestive of this cooperation that we have in Charlotte where they light up the buildings the same way. You know what I mean? Like you get together and Charlotte has this history of business and civic leaders kind of getting together and acting in concert toward some common purpose. And I wonder if that's your experience and how you've experienced that compared to the many other places where you've lived and worked in your history, in your own career as a curator and a director.
Charlotte is very unique in this. And I think it is because of how the most of us came about. I mean, we're relatively recent. We're a very young arts city. And so I know that when conversations were happening in the 90s and the early aughts about what the future of the arts were going to be in Charlotte, it was very intentional that there needed to be great support for the infrastructure, building new buildings, supporting those. So all three of us are in city-owned buildings. And so as a result, the city's our landlord, and they've done an amazing job of keeping all of our buildings, tip-top shape and supporting us that way. But they also knew long-term they have to support us for our programming as well. It wasn't just for the building. And so this long-term investment is really paying off. And you see, again, all three of us benefiting greatly by the support of the city and the county in a very new and innovative way. Both of them have come together with significant support for us starting this year and hopefully going forward each year. which allows us to really thrive. So all three of us can experiment. We can try new things. We can push ourselves and bring in new audiences and really try to figure out how it all works together. So we put together a series of conversations this year on collecting. So if you're a supporter of one of the institutions, you'll be invited to these conversations about what does a community of collectors look like for a city like Charlotte. And I think that's a really important conversation that we have at the macro level, so that we understand what's happening throughout the whole community with individuals who are supporting the arts.
And I imagine it probably starts with some formative experiences early in your life of profound beauty and joy in art. What do you love, like from a aesthetic standpoint? Like, what are your?
Oh, I'm completely obsessed with everything. Like,
Yeah.
I love going into a museum where I know nothing about what I'm looking at. I mean, put me inside a museum that's on, 18th century Korean ceramics, and I know nothing about it.
Right.
But I will want to spend time there getting to know it. And all of a sudden you leave the experience and you see things differently. And to me, it's about curiosity. And I've always sort of said, if museums do their job right, art museums especially, we're helping people achieve a greater understanding of what makes them curious about the world. And so we continue to think about and see things differently the more we're exposed to things. And even if we don't understand it when we first see it or appreciate it or even like it, it's almost irrelevant, because what it does is it builds up a visual vocabulary and a way to see the world. And so when you leave an experience, you might go out into the world and see something completely differently and see the world differently. And that in and of itself is the payoff.
In getting ready to meet you, looked you up, and one of the main things that I found about you was the Charlotte Ledger article by Lindsay Banks about how to look at a work of modern art, how to engage with it. And one of the things I took away from it is you don't have to, like, sort of quote unquote like it necessarily all the time to gain something from the experience of engaging with it.
Yeah. And, pushing us out of our algorithm defined worlds right now. If you walk into a museum that's been curated by someone, with an exhibition that you don't know much about, you're getting a look into their thought process, and you're looking into the institution, what the institution values. And I think that's another way of just getting out of our heads and being present. And one of the things I think museums, libraries, and other cultural institutions do is it reminds us what it means to be human. And, getting out of our camps and our tribes and all of that. And it's more about what it is that brings us together versus what separates us.
You mentioned that most folks think of the modern period as being 1900 to 1970 or so. And then contemporary, is that 1970 to the present? Is that right? So how do you, when does that, when's there going to be a cutoff? Does there need to be some sort of break in the way that people are making art? Is that how we define these periods? Like the look of it changes in a way that we can all sort of see?
Yeah, I mean, I wonder if these designations are going to matter in 15 or 20 or 30 years. I think that'll be left to the next generations to really think about. Modern really is the push toward abstraction, the ways in which art no longer had to replicate what you could see in nature. And then you had this whole group of artists, abstract artists, who pushed it to the point that it was completely abstract. And then you're sort of saying, well,
you're even questioning, like, is this art?
Is this art?
Yeah.
And then it's like, where do we go from there? Once you paint the black painting,
right?
What's next?
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden you have this whole sort of explosion of new ways of thinking about what art could be. It could be land art, it could be video art, it could be any sorts of things, or it could be driven by popular culture. And so that's why you have the emergence of pop art in the late 60s and 70s.
We're talking about the Firebird earlier, and I think you mentioned that it's the most Instagrammed image in Charlotte. I was wondering if Instagrammability is an aspect of contemporary art now, like if this interaction between Instagrammability and the work that artists are making today.
For sure. And artists have always been enamored with technology. So you look at artists who worked with photography, who use photography not only as its own medium, but also as a way to understand other things and incorporate photography differently. Printmaking, whole history of printmaking. Artists in the 60s started using video to sort of chronicle and experiment with how you see the world. Now we have artists who are using artificial intelligence. We've got a show that opens in October that's called Assembly Lines, Modernism and Machines. An artist who is working alongside of an AI machine that she's created that draws along with her. And so artists are always on the front line of helping us understand not only new technologies, but new ways of seeing.
We'll be right back to the conversation, but first, this podcast episode is brought to you by Coca-Cola Consolidated, Charlotte's local bottler and the largest Coca-Cola bottler in the U.S. Veterans have a special place in our hearts at Coca-Cola Consolidated. As a company whose purpose includes serving others, we can think of no greater servant leaders than the men and women who served our country. Join our team. Learn more at workforcoke.com.
What I find really interesting is that your work with Bechtler is you're not just sort of reflecting what's happening in art today, you're also participating in it. And the museum's role is a big piece of the puzzle here, right? Because you are, whatever's happening in the art world, what the artists are creating is obviously a huge part of it, right? But another big part of it is what are museums showing? What is in a museum, right? From where you're sitting, it must be exciting to be doing, work that's new today.
And it's interesting because, we work 3 to 5 years out in terms of organizing exhibitions, getting on people's schedules for hosting other shows from around the world. We want to be as of the moment as we can, but making the decision today about what we're going to show in 2029, the world's going to be completely different in 29. And our choice today has to be as thoughtful as it can be about what might be relevant or interesting or appealing 4 or 5 years from now. And that's, I think, is probably the toughest part of what we do. The amount of ideas we have and the range of where we want to take our programming is limitless. But the question is, given our space, given our parameters, how much can we do and keep that freshness happening? So we try to plan as much as we can in the future, but we also try to keep a little bit open. So if something were to happen, that we could quickly show it or include it in an exhibition or pivot if we needed to something that was more relevant to what's happening in Charlotte or the region at the moment. Our mission, because it's significantly more global than others throughout the region, I want to know what's happening in Southeast Asia, in Africa, in Latin America, and throughout Europe, both in the modern but also in the contemporary worlds. And so what can we bring to Charlotte that you're not going to see anywhere else in the region or even in the U.S.? So that, to me, is the real opportunity for the Bechtler to continue to grow in that area and put Charlotte on the map as an arts center. Our new slogan is Global Stories Locally Told. And it really is to get people to understand that our mission is to go as far afield as we possibly can, bring those ideas and that art to Charlotte and to the region.
Well, it appears as though it's not just an exercise in finding the great art that's happening now or exhibiting the great art that happened in the 20th century, but also exploring what the role of the museum is in community and figuring out ways of translating the experience of art to people, to audiences, some of whom are exactly the kinds of, gray-haired guys like you and me who like to go to museums when we're visiting a new city, or maybe people who've never set foot in a museum before. And you've done some really interesting work just recently along those lines. For example, you had a program, or you have a program currently, where healthcare providers can prescribe art to folks. Can you talk me through that a little bit?
Yeah, so we started right out of COVID. We had a pretty significant change in staffing during COVID and right after COVID. And one of the things we said was, what can this museum do in Charlotte post-COVID to address a community need? So we have the art side, which is very much about the global modernism, as we talked about. But also we also live in Charlotte, and we want to make sure that we're a great partner and a collaborator within Charlotte. We wanted to do something that was more about giving back. And so loneliness became the one area that we all thought that's an area that we could make a difference in. And so we started looking for programs. We started looking around, and there are these programs called Art on Prescription, which mostly it's arts councils or performing arts centers around the UK and a few in the US, but mostly in the UK, that essentially a patient is prescribed a visit to a museum or a visit to a performance as a way to combat mental health issues, not to cure or not to take it, but that first step of, maybe this is enough to get people connected. And we thought, wow, that's a major need here and throughout the US, but major need coming out of COVID. Also, we thought, what can we do to affect that? So put together a program where we work with Novant Health for our first year and a half program of this program. They will prescribe to their patients who are in the behavioral health program art on prescription. And then they come to the museum. They're part of a cohort. We have 10 people every month that we invite in. And we essentially do art programming, not only at the museum, but with our arts partners, the ballet, Three Bone Theater, Clayworks, so that for the course of a year, this cohort of people get to interact with each other.
Same people. All right. So it's not just taking in the art, it's also interacting with your cohort, right?
Yes.
That's a big part of the thing. I did not understand that. Okay.
And then as we build that cohort out over the course of a year, they can interact at different performances and different interactions. So it really is a way of building a community through interactions with the arts. And the idea is that once we have the first year and a half of a research base, we'll now know what works and then be able to create programs that we can take out as standalone programs to individual groups throughout the community. So it won't just be you have to be prescribed by a doctor. We can then take our findings and create programs that work with boys and girls clubs or senior centers or corporate HR departments.
It's hard to think of how to be innovative as a museum executive director, but it clearly is possible, right? And so what you've just described sounds fascinating. You've also done something recently relating to access and disability and conception of like how art can interact with different people in different ways. And this relates to bringing art that maybe was created to be taken in visually to people who are visually impaired. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
So this summer we invited 2 artists into the museum to help us look at our collection in a new way. And one of the artists is a video artist named Janet Biggs, who's New York-based, who's had work shown at the Mint before. She's working with a Charlotte-based choreographer and dancer that she has worked with on several projects. Davian is vision impaired and has been legally blind since he was a teenager, and now he's in his late 20s. And so they came about a year and a half ago and danced and did the performance inside the museum that Janet filmed that became part of a bigger work that was shown at Virginia Tech. And while they were here, I said to Janet, would you and Davey consider curating our next summer's exhibition from the collection? We got our curator at the museum, Katja, involved, and Katja took it to amazing levels. And what we did is we started with the exhibition from the collection, which was about movement and the body, art from our collection that had that as a theme. So Janet, Davian, and Katja curated that. And then Janet created works with Davian and mathematicians and physicists and other people from Virginia Tech that literally took artworks in our collection, photographed them, and ran those photographs through several sets of algorithms that created data sets from the points with, this is where I'm going to get.
You're using technology, right?
Yes. And they ended up creating soundscapes based on the photographs that were taken of the works, the visual works of art. So when you walked into our space, you could see the Picasso tapestry, but you could hear what had been created, digital manipulation of a sound of what the tapestry might sound like.
You use the data of the image of the sound to produce sound.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
It's sort of, just it pushes it ever so far to say, wow, I've never thought about hearing a static visual work of art.
Do you, as a person who is able to see, perceive the sound as having fidelity to the work? Or is it a different work?
It's a different, like I didn't try to make that one-to-one comparison. Like I wasn't trying to say, oh, well, here's in this 7-minute loop of sound.
Yeah.
We're 2/3 of the way through the tapestry at this particular section.
Right.
Like, Others might have, one of the other works we did was a work by Barbara Hepworth, a sculptor in our collection, who this amazing, beautiful modernist work that you walk around. And that we installed it so that you would hear the sound from 12 different speakers around the room.
Yeah.
So as you walked around the sculpture, you heard different things. So that, I think, was a little bit more visceral in what you felt and experienced when you walked around, because you were supposed to walk around the sculpture too.
It's a really interesting exploration of the way that art builds on what came before as well, because artists sort of build on what came before. This is a literal way of doing that. You have a new work, an audio work that is not just inspired by, but literally taken dot for dot from a physical work that existed before.
But it was taken from the reproduction of the work.
So, oh gosh. All right.
So I'll just say one more of the works that was in the show was Davian did he narrated a walk that he made from the Firebird into the museum and up to the 4th floor gallery. And it was his experience as someone who couldn't see as he walked, what he experienced. And again, for us, it was a chance to think about our building in a different way, think about the Firebird in a different way. And anyway, it was a very heady show that for a summer show that was not supposed to be as mind taxing as it ended up being. It was really something I think we all thought, wow, this operates on so many levels.
I'm really glad that you mentioned that, because I was going to ask you about the building. The Bechtler Museum is beautiful. It is one of the most impressive buildings, I think, in our city. And I just wonder what it's like to be there every day and to be a part of it in its physical space as it interacts with the community that you're sitting in. Would you just describe it and tell us what inspires you about the physical building?
Yeah. It really, even though it was created in the postmodern moment, its design was based on the strong principles that are found within modern architecture. So there is a beautiful severity to the interior. I mean, I love when you walk into our lobby and you're leaving the activity of Tryon Street and you're leaving all that's happening outside and the noise, and it can be noisy on Tryon at the moment. And so you leave it and you come inside, and there's this uplift in our lobby. It goes all the way up to the 4th floor. So you've got this feeling of, I'm in a different space completely. And that's what a great museum lobby does, is it takes you from the everyday to something better and different, right? And so you walk into our space and you feel different. And then you go up into the galleries and you can escape. And that to me is what a great museum can do, is it helps you to breathe. It helps you to understand the world around you in new ways. And so I just think our building does that. And for being, a modest scale of a building, it is a building that I think works exceptionally well because of its size. I think if it were much bigger, it wouldn't have the same feel. And I think Boda and Andreas and all the people who worked very hard to get that design right nailed it in a way that 15, 18 years on, I still find joy in it. And I've been there for 5 years, and you walk and you're like, wow, I've forgotten that experience in that space.
What's coming up? We've talked about some of the very interesting things that you've done. The assembly line exploration of art and technology is coming up soon, but you're looking 3-5 years out. So what can we, the future listeners of the Charlotte Ledger podcast, what are they going to experience?
I think what they're going to hopefully see if we do our job right, and that is we're bringing art from all over the world into Charlotte in ways that we have not done before. And I think that really is, I would love if everyone holds us accountable to that. That is truly where we see our role, and what our mission is to continue to look far afield and bring the best of 20th and 21st century art to Charlotte.
Todd Smith, thank you so much for spending time with me today on the Charlotte Ledger podcast. That's it for today. Thanks for listening. This episode was produced by Lindsay Banks. You can find out more about the Charlotte Ledger by visiting thecharlotteledger.com.
This podcast episode was brought to you by Coca-Cola Consolidated, Charlotte's local bottler and the largest Coca-Cola bottler in the U.S. Coca-Cola Consolidated demonstrates a strong commitment to supporting veterans and military families. Join our team. Learn more at workforcoke.com.
QueenCityPodcastNetwork.com.